Yo no tengo nada escrito. Ah, bueno, correcto. Bueno, sí. Muy bien.
Por favor, les rogamos si pueden tomar asiento y permanecer en silencio, así podemos dar comienzo a las próximas charlas. Muchas gracias. Bueno, muchas gracias. De vuelta les pedimos si pueden, por favor, poner sus celulares en silencio o apagarlos para dar comienzo a las segundas charlas.
Well, welcome back. Our next session will be on translation and linguistics, and I'll be hosting this part of the conference. Let's now welcome our first speaker, María Alonso, whose lecture is entitled Translation and Hermeneutics. Could you hear me? You couldn't. Shall I repeat? I repeat the name of our speaker, María Alonso, and her lecture is Translation and Hermeneutics.
Thank you so much, Tiggy, for the floor. Thank you to the organizers. Good morning to everybody. Well, the title of my presentation is Translation and Hermeneutics, but it has a subtitle, which is the importance of hermeneutical translation in a multicultural society. Of course, this is the 7th conference on English, and it deals with English language and interculturality and modern languages, and I will focus on multiculturality. My interest in translation and hermeneutics started many, many years ago when I read a book written by Monsignor Ronald Knox in 1949. I wasn't even born in that year. But it was very important because he addresses the problems of Bible translation, which is absolutely applicable to sacred or religious text. You choose the term you like best to define the sort of text. Of course, he discovered many mistakes deriving from a faulty interpretation of the Holy Scripture. And the word interpretation kept ringing in my ears. And recently, as I am a translator, a certified translator by profession, and also conference interpreter, my interest has been rekindled when I was invited to provide interpretation services on a simultaneous basis on legal hermeneutics. Well, the university, UNSAM, Universidad de San Martín, told me, look, you have to translate the well-known dispute between German philosopher Hans-Georg Gadamer, and I give you this name, please remember it, Gadamer. He wrote a wonderful book, Truth and Method, Wahrheit und Methode in German, of course. I'm not going to delve into this dispute, and famous jurist, Italian jurist, Emilio Betti, who wrote a book known as General Theory of Interpretation. This is the translation into English. Well, I was really astonished, and I was very interested in the controversial issues about interpreting texts and how their own works were translated from German and from Italian, respectively, into different languages. Now, what is hermeneutics? Hermeneutics is a fancy term, in fact, for interpretation only, to understand and comprehend. Of course, between understanding and comprehending, we have apprehending, no? But who started studying hermeneutics as a science or as a technique? Again, I'm not going to delve into philosophical disputes because you and I are translators and or interpreters, and we work. I want to share with you the product of my experience what we call hands-on experience. But we have to keep an open mind, a philosophical mind, and inquiry into this specific field. In fact, the line of delving into interpretation was started by Friedrich Schleiermacher, a German philosopher who noticed that the general principles of understanding in the 1800s needed revisiting. And it's very important for you to bear in mind something, that hermeneutics is not only a technique. It does not only mean interpreting a written text or an oral discourse. It's really a method of interpreting the world. Why? Because a person's speech is not only part of a language community, it is part of the individual's thinking. And I will stress on this concept because then we will see how neural networks, artificial intelligence, which was mentioned here, works these times. And you, the younger ones, we are very young at heart, and you are young at heart, and you are young at age, have to deal with this reality. But do not forget to think. Professor Gennady mentioned common sense. Well, what's common sense? It's just sitting down and see what's this? Is it interesting? Is it meaning? Does it have a meaning or not? So this man, Schleiermacher, which is a long last name, as you can see, was supplemented by a disciple, Wilhelm Dilthey, who saw that understanding is the key, and I quote, for the human sciences in contrast with the natural sciences. The natural sciences observe and explain, right? Nature. But the humanities explain the expressions of life. We know that translation is a mediator, a gap filler, a bridge, whatever you may call it, between languages, cultures, and last but not least, societies. This is why I have chosen in the subtitle to my presentation, multicultural society, because it has the notions of a community shaped as a society. Why is it so? Why does translation play this role as a gap filler or mediator? Well, because it enables people to understand the world. And remember this idea, understanding the world, because understanding the world means communicating, facilitating communication. And globalization has gradually diluted borders among cultures, and the concept of translation has evolved from the traditional linguistic process, which is of the essence, an equivalence of meaning, Peter Newmark, of course, you are familiar with him, to the notion of effective communication between cultures. The idea of being effective and being faithful has to do with preparing ourselves as translators and or interpreters by a holistic interpretation of the text. That is to say, you should interpret the text at large. Of course, as Professor Gennady mentioned, surface. Remember, surface is ambiguous. He said, he very well explained this notion, and I jotted down because it is exactly what I would like to pinpoint here. The surface is the structure, but there's something deep down running under the text, which is never ambiguous sometimes. Of course, we can discuss this later on, but you should go deep into. How can we do it? Well, I will deal in a couple of minutes because I will try to share with you how I'm focusing all this, why is my interest. First of all, for an effective communication between people speaking different languages, The act of translation requires thorough interpretation of the text. And hermeneutics is that science or text, a useful tool for better understanding messages in order to provide better translation, which is a translatio. That would be the term, the Latin term. And we have to keep creative when we read the source language text and when we translate it into the target language. So creativity in text production is of the essence as well. Now, after this introduction, and before delving into hermeneutical as well as cultural translation, let's define terms, because we take definitions for granted or take terms for granted. So I'd like to share with you just brief translations, broad translations and broad definitions of these 4 key notions, which are expressed by terms: translation, hermeneutics, communication, and culture. Hermeneutics, you already have an idea because that's the title of my presentation. Let's start by translation. We are all familiar with that, but my viewpoint, exactly within the borders and limits of my presentation here, will be communication of meaning. So I will take the definition of translation as the communication of meaning from a source text to a target text or oral discourse. The act of translation is always necessarily preceded by the act of interpretation, which involves, as I told you before, understanding, comprehending, in the middle apprehending, for rendering meaning, because otherwise it would be impossible to render meaning. You have to understand. For instance, for a conference interpreter or an oral interpreter, whatever the mode of interpretation would be, there are 3 main principles for an interpreter, 3 main verbs, which is one single verb: listen, listen, and listen, because you have not listened well, you cannot then understand, deverbalize, and produce that message in another language. The same holds true for the translator, who has to go deep into the text, that stream that is running under the text, and you should discover it. And it is also interesting to tell you that this branch of knowledge deals with the interpretation of language, as I told you, whether written or oral, what we say written or spoken. And if you have to translate or interpret some sort of discourse which is oral, it also has to do with silence. Silence has meaning also, whether intentionally or not. So please bear in mind these notions. Then definitions and things, you're going to find it in books. They are important, but you can find it, books, social media, validated websites, and the like. As I told you at the very beginning, let's define hermeneutics. I'm still with these terms, so I go back, which is a fancy word. Do you know where does this word derive from? Does anybody know what is the origin of hermeneutics, which is very, very academic, which is interpretation? From Hermes, the Greek god of what? Of communication, the messenger of the gods. And Hermes is the god of trade. If you go to the stock exchange, I'm a member because I'm a member of the arbitration panel, no? As a legal expert, as a translator expert. Well, you have a big statue, because it's not a statuette, it's a big statue of Hermes when you're entering. Why? Because it's communication, it's trade, open mind, respect for the one who is thinking differently from us, all right? And not to fear. Fear is another element. When we don't know something, we are fearful. Well, we shouldn't be fearful. We should be bold. bold, brave, right? Not reckless, not reckless. You see the difference. You know, you are translators. So Hermes was also the alleged inventor of language in Greek mythology, of course. But hermeneutics is a field of phenomenology. This is very interesting because our colleague Jonathan Raspa mentioned being and being there. Well, my presentation has a little bit of the knack that he shared with us. Why? Phenomenology is the philosophy of experience. It was a philosophy which was a catchy word in the 20th century, mid-20s by the end of that century, right? But which is based on the fact, or the premise, to be more precise, that the ultimate source of meaning, which is of the essence for us translators to discover, the ultimate source of meaning and value is the lived experience of human beings, the way you live. And this is why many a time the word interpretation for philosophers, they use the word Dasein. Dasein in German means being there, which is even more than being there, sitting. You are sitting, I'm sitting, I may be standing, I may be here, but thinking of another thing because I'm not interested in, or I just rambled, my mind is rambling or whatever. No, no. This means that hermeneutic is interpreting the world, as I told you before, which is very important, and remember this, but which is Dasein, being translated into English by existence. Existence has different from being. Being es el ser, right? And existence es el estar, pero como existencia. You are defining the being there. So we translators should be there in the text. This is what we generally do when we use machine translations and things. Oh, that's wonderful. But we are not really being with our mind, our common sense, saying, I see something different here. I see something that I cannot understand. And I need time or not, or I need some extra elements, extra linguistic elements that we're going to see it here. In fact, Jonathan mentioned that when he dealt with philosopher Kush, he mentioned Kush's thinkings, while he mentioned Coetzee narratives, because of course, Coetzee was writing, it's different, you are there. And language is synchronic, right? It's not diachronic. So I mean synchronic, and I do repeat it here, is that you are here. So the translator is there. If he's translating a text from the Middle Ages, then I will say something from the Middle Ages, something I want to share with that. Just information, evidence-based. And I was thinking, or you may be thinking, well, what's in it? Is it meat in it or not? Am I thrilled by this or not? Of course, if you're translating a sort of handbook on how a machine works, that's another story. But let's speak about translation as it was originally interpreted in the field of hermeneutics. And I told you that it started on Saint Jerome translating the Bible. He wrote a lot about these interpretation challenges. And then in modern age, not this age, but as I told you, the beginning of the so-called modernity, not postmodernity, many philosophers started studying what hermeneutics was like. First one, Martin Heidegger. And you see, there's a line, Martin Heidegger, Husserl, or Husserl in English, Husserl, and then you have Gadamer, Betty, which has another idea, and Paul Ricoeur in France. Of course, then we have postmodernity. I just tell you this is not name dropping. This is what I want to tell you. It's not, I'm not dropping names to say, oh my, she has read it. No, no, no. This is just for you to jot it down. They are worthwhile reading. Even to disagree, because disagreement is the seed of intellectual progress. If I shut myself down, I cannot really make any progress in life, in translation, or whatever. So, summing up, hermeneutic is a method of interpreting the world, which is dynamic. We spoke about synchronic in the field of language, which is subject to changes. Another topic I want to share with you, besides any kind of bibliographical reference or whatever. The world is subject to changes. We say we perceive the world as human beings, as translators, and we interpret the world in light of what? Of time, of space, but bottom line of our preconceptions, of our biases, of our traditions, beliefs, prejudice, imaginations. I have been working for a neuroscience research center ever since it was created in 2005, which is called INECO. No, it is INECO. I work there as an interpreter. Oh my. I've seen the best neuroscientists all over the world. Seen is interpreted. In fact, next week we have a seminar. They deal with all these problems. The brain is there, but it is not only the brain. The brain should be working. All the solutions are not included in our brain, but they have delved into the study of cognitive biases. What is? For instance, you are all members of social media, all right? Las redes sociales, right? You tend to join groups that, well, like minds think alike. So you say, oh my, I post this information. You're wonderful. You're in the beach or whatever. And that's a confirmation bias. That's the most tricky thing that it may happen to us as translators, to be biased. It's impossible not to be biased. So forget about not being prejudiced. We all have prejudices, but we have to be aware of them and try to overcome them as far as possible, as far as possible. And I tell you all these things that perhaps you're not going to find it in books, because in books you have references and you have everything at hand. You come here just to listen to something that may make you think differently, alike, or just stand up and face your challenges. So, being aware of these presuppositions, which are unexamined, of course, I will just have 5 minutes. Well, doesn't matter. It's the knack of what I wanted to share with you. It's very important to examine the presuppositions. And of course, in communication, translations involves the use of signs. This is very important, which are linguistic units. Those signs, we need them to designate an object in relation to meaning, an object or whatever. It may also be a relationship to something. And when you are speaking the same tongue, remember that we also convey meaning by gestures, tone, cultural context, and silence that I mentioned. And now, as I have just 5 minutes, can I take 5 more? Just 5 more? Are you interested or not? If not, I just, the audience is there. I come from the audience, so I ask just 5 more minutes only. Culture may be defined as what? As the ways of life for an entire society, the ways of life. This is interesting. As Professor Gennady mentioned, gender-driven language. You see, man, no, I have to say human being. Well, okay. No, he, she, no, they, their, them. I do, this is another discussion. But the important thing is that culture is communication and communication is language. And communication changes, especially for the younger ones. So we have to keep our mind open, all right? Share with them this message: think, and think, right? Instead of listen, and listen, or read, thinking, all right? And just very briefly, because I have prepared more things, I will be, as I told you, dealing with hermeneutical translation. Look, we don't have too much time. And I thought that I was going to speak 20 or 25 minutes, but I see that you're listening to me. Steiner, go and browse it on the internet. I'm not going to deal very much into this, but I was thinking, this man, a German one, Franco-American, in fact, because he was born in France. And in the times of the Nazi period, he and his family were caught, so to speak, because they were caught. And he had then to emigrate to the US. Again, think about freedom and respect for those who do not think like we do, or as we do. George Steiner has a hermeneutical method. This is important. It's called motion because it is dynamic. If you go and see these four main stages, trust, intrusion, incorporation, and restitution, then you read it, right? But what are the four takeaways for you? You have to trust that there is meaning in it for you to translate. Then you intrude or invade the text as if you were a burglar. In fact, Steiner speaks, it's a robbery procedure, a burglar. You just storm into the house. You invade it. You try to see what's going on there. You put it upside down and inside out. Then you incorporate that meaning from the source text, source language in this case. You embody the meaning. This is very important. For you to embody the meaning, the translator should be empathic. And empathy doesn't mean that you think exactly as the writer thinks or whatever. It's a projection, an empathic projection of the interpreter's desire to understand the activity. This is what Steiner says. And I quote him, of course. This man was wonderful because, of course, he dealt with, he allows us to deal with the so-called revival of globalization. One of the, remember in the morning, this is very important. Globalization is, of course, we know what that phenomenon is, but the possibility of reviving local cultures is also of the essence, because in that way we may avoid single, unique way of thinking, which is absolutely dangerous, in my opinion, of course, and in the opinion of history, if we read it. And of course, I don't have much more time, so I invite you to remember these four steps and ask yourselves if this is valid today. In my opinion, it is, but try to think for yourself. Then we have here cultural translation, and I'm going very deep. Cecilia, can I ask her just? No? Okay. Okay. Then you have a lot of false friends. What's cultural translation? Well, it comes from cultural anthropology. For those who are not familiar with that, you know that anthropology focuses on studying human issues among cultures, or if you like, cultural issues among humans, right? Take into account the extra-linguistic elements that are very important in language and culture. And even though I have some more things for you to tell you, in the field of language and cultures, pay attention to new words, coining new words, neologisms. I wrote an article which was published in the ATI, the American Translators Association, on the relationship between the translator, the technical one, and the specialist or expert. Remember that when you are coining a word, whether cultural or technical or legal, you are in fact creating concept in another language because there's absence of concepts. I have my presentation. Those who are interested, then I will just brush it up with all the things that I have written from my colleagues, which are very important as well. Remember that fidelity is not literalism. And in closing, this is my main message. I'd like to share with you some food for thought regarding machine translation. And I say machine, I don't say CAD. I don't say computer aided translation because neural networks are being mimicked by the latest translation software and AI, artificial intelligence software. It has improved our task. We all know that. We use it. We can predict the likelihood of sentences, of words, associations, as the old thesaurus, no? With the aid of computing, of course. But we should always practice our hermeneutic skills in order to avoid technology bias. And I have 4 takeaways, we translators should practice these interpretive skills. And I use hermeneutic because it is more than interpretation. Remember 4 things. You understand, you comprehend, you apprehend, and you interpret. And to find equivalence of meaning in a global world, but defined by cultural diversity. We are inhabited by different cultures. And the hermeneutic approach is a useful tool to understand the text and be faithful to the messages. Remember that fidelity is not literalism, right? And we translators should enhance these hermeneutic skills. What for? To stay creative. That's point number 1, I should say. Here is what I have just, the hermeneutic skills, the hermeneutic approach, and the cultural translation. We should stay creative, be free from technology biases, as well as any other kind of bias, political, religious, whatever, cultural, biases that preconception, remember, no? Ethnicity, all right? And then just a very brief comment about the Dark Ages. I would like you to delve into this. I would say that maybe Dark Ages is a misnomer. They were not so dark. I can tell you this. I don't want to make any comment on myself, but I have been working, and I'm still working at a research group studying the Middle Ages at UCA, Universidad Católica Argentina. I give you 3 names. Azucena Fraboski, Nilda Guglielmi, Jacques Duby. These people wrote about Middle Ages, and early and late Middle Ages saw not only, as it was asked by somebody here, the birth of universities, universitas, Bologna, Padua, Paris, well, and then Oxford and Cambridge later on. But there was a nun, of course, she was the daughter of a rich man, Hildegard von Bingen, Hildegarda de Bingen. She was in charge of an abbey. She was a translator, that's what I call it. And I'm not going to make any other comment. I don't want to, I say that with all due respect, I disagree that those ages were not as dark as they may seem. They have, of course, maybe less light in some things, but more light in education, knowledge, and open mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, we could have been listening all
Yes,
morning,
of course.
but-
Yes. No, it's okay. It's okay.
Well, now let's welcome our next speaker, Cecilia Irrazábal, whose dissertation is entitled Legal English, an overview of false friends.
Okay, yeah, that would be better. Estaba ahí recién, ¿eh? La que termina con thank you.
Ah.
Es esa.
Sí, a ver, ponela.
Por ahí le cambiaron el nombre, sí, es esa. Sí, es esa. Es con el botón de la derecha para pasar, ¿no? Okay, perfect. Shall I start?
All right. Sorry. You could start.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much for this invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I guess some of you know me already, but perhaps some of you don't. I'm a certified legal translator. I'm also a law student. I'm already a Bachelor of Laws, and I'm also a legal translation lecturer. So basically, I have structured this brief presentation based on all these backgrounds. So I hope you can find it helpful. False cognates or false friends. Maria Teresa has been very clear about meaning in the sense that we translate ideas, we don't translate words. So this presentation is very much in keeping with that philosophy. Now, many of my students tell me I have chosen Traductorado Público, this course, because, I'm very much afraid of getting into a booth, interpreting is too stressful for me. And honestly, I don't like teaching. And honestly enough, I think that those that work for publishing companies don't get paid enough. So after discarding all these options, I have chosen Traductorado Público or the legal translation course. Well, okay, welcome then. So as I was saying earlier, and I did have a small talk with Eduardo, we face a challenge, and it is to motivate our undergraduate students to get into legal translation and get the spirit of it. Students are very honest, and I appreciate that, and they're right in the sense that legal translation, yes, that's difficult, that's tough, and legal vocabulary has its own challenges. Let's try to avoid using the word difficulties, problems, and try to redefine our approach and focus on challenges. So these are the challenges of legal English. I find it difficult. Why do I have changes of meaning in my exam? How can I improve? Which dictionary do you recommend? Can I rely on glossaries? Let's try to establish a diagnosis, for lack of a better word, and focus on the, or some of the features of legal English. So polysemy, a complex syntax, terms of art, Latin words, and words of Latin origin, and the use of doublets and triplets. The list, of course, can go on, but then, as you can see, among all these features, I have chosen false cognates. Before getting into false cognates per se, or false friends, I will first of all mention a few examples of polysemy. I may take it for granted that you are aware of that. Words may have two meanings, like there's a song, right? Stairway to Heaven, that confirms that sometimes words have two meanings. So the word equidad, equity. Equity may get translated as equidad right away, but not always. Words may have two meanings or more than two meanings. So this is one of the challenges of the legal jargon. Sentences may be as long as a paragraph. I am aware, and I guess you are aware, of the plain language movement. Of course, I agree with that, but sometimes as a legal translation lecturer, I have to explain and show how lawyers write rather than how lawyers should write. So if you get into the filings of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and if you download genuine contracts, you will see that sometimes, or frequently enough, a paragraph is a sentence, subordinate clauses, doublets, triplets. Think about an indemnity clause. An indemnity is a commitment to protect. It is not indemnización. Now, who are you protecting? In case you fail damages, in case you face damages, in case you face a claim by a third party. So that indemnity will contemplate, or that protection will contemplate a company. But then if you mention a company, will you take into account the employees working for that company, agents, officers? So inevitably, sentences get long because lawyers have to contemplate every possible situation. They're not thinking about our work as a translator, but they're thinking about protecting the interests of their clients. And in the absence of a codified system, many times they have to focus on every single detail. That's the reason why sentences are too long. Terms of art. Consideration. Consideración. Am I translating meaning? Is communication a synonym of literalism? You see, in contracts especially, words are redefined, and consideration is in fact, can I ask for your participation? Contraprestación. Sometimes consideration is the equivalent of causa fin. But then, in order to master the language of lawyers, there is some background in law that inevitably you should get into. Why do I study law? Law is boring. You see, professors talk about some issues that I'm not really concerned about. Okay, but yes, then you'll have to deal with these complexities. That's the reason why. So many words in the legal domain are redefined, such as consideration. Latin words, such as inter alia, bona fide, in fact, sometimes they coincide with the Latin words that we use, and sometimes they don't. Bona fide, a bona fide resident, does that sound familiar to you? Is not a word combination that we are so familiarized with in Spanish. And last but not least, the use of doublets and triplets. Well, I'm not going to comment on this so much. I will now get into the topic of my presentation per se. What are false cognates? Can we take this word for granted? What is a cognate? A cognate is a word that has a similar origin. I can see that many prestigious professors are here, perhaps those who deliver lectures on history, the historical developments of English. You know that the British Isles used to be a province of the Roman Empire. That's the reason why there are many words of Latin origin. And that's the reason why we relax perhaps too frequently. Jurisprudence. Okay, well, this sounds very much the same as jurisprudencia. Okay, let's go for it. Change of meaning. Sometimes there's a change of meaning. Sometimes there is no change of meaning, and I will try to explain this in my presentation. So, one of the fathers of translation theory, Peter Newmark, has already anticipated this problem, even if it's a problem or a challenge that teachers face, that lawyers face. You see, they activate lexical and semantic interference. And this is, well, Peter is saying it, one of the worst problems, for both the graduate and the undergraduate translator. And now, perhaps those who are more familiarized with French can help me out. In fact, the origin of false friends as such can be traced back to 1928. And by this, I'm focusing on two French authors who wrote this book, which you may be familiarized with, Le Faux en Mix. Not a good pronunciation, perhaps, but anyway. Communication. So my presentation perhaps is not so much focused on theoretical background, but some examples. Which are the consequences of not getting these false cognates right? Which are the consequences of literalisms, as Maria Herminia has just said? I wonder if you can read. Some examples are in Spanish. Some years ago, Madonna was about to deliver a concert and she had to cancel the concert, don't know why. So one of her fans decided to file a lawsuit against her. Yeah, indeed. Now, look at this sentence. On what grounds are you filing a lawsuit? I mean, for those of you who are not lawyers, you cannot file a lawsuit just because. You cannot file a lawsuit just because I didn't like the fact that she calls the concert off. Hay que probar el daño. So injuries are sustained. What kind of injuries? Bueno, los daños consecuentes. What do you mean by that? Where is this coming from? Anybody who would like to participate? Consequential damages. Entre otros, y la falta de consideración pagada. We are bridges between cultures. Sometimes those bridges break down, as you can see. That student will not make it in Traducción Jurídica, will probably get a failure. What do you think, Eduardo? What's the problem here? False cognates. As I said, consideration is not always consideración. In this case, it should be pago o contraprestación. And then consequential damages, but that's harder to explain. But these are the damages that directly flow from the breach of contract. Then the parts of a contract. Las partes del contrato. Pero entonces, ¿cómo queda? ¿Puedo o no puedo decir esto? You see, that's the typical question raised by translation undergraduates. Well, of course you can say that, the parts of a contract, but these are the sections of a contract, the different clauses of a contract. However, when you refer to las partes del contrato, los que suscriben el contrato, these are the parties to the contract. German dogmatic in criminal law. That's strange, isn't it? Well, that's also strange. After all, it's la dogmática germana en el derecho penal. You see, when you study criminal law, not surprisingly, you read translated versions, unless you're knowledgeable in German, Kelsen, Roxing. So, what's that? La dogmática alemana o germánica en el derecho penal. I know that this is not a class, but anyway. So, understand, apprehend, comprehend. Dogmática is theory, and if it's theory, it's philosophy of law. Therefore, a more sensible translation, common sense, as presenter said before, should be jurisprudence or philosophy of law in criminal law. El examen cruzado de testigos. I see some of you are frowning. This is the cross-examination of witnesses. In fact, in order to fully understand that, you need to be aware, or you need to get into the fundamentals of civil procedure and how trial is developed. But basically, what we mean by this is, rather than examen cruzado, es la formulación de repreguntas, because examination, in fact, is formulating questions. Then, el estatuto de fraudes. Where is this coming from? This is another false cognate. The statute of frauds. I've seen this false cognate many times. They look alike. Estatuto, statute. Spelling is the same. So let's go ahead. And, yo lo tengo así en el glosario que me pasaron. Okay, yes, I work with CAT tools. Así está en la memoria, en la memoria. I need to meet my deadline. Okay, yes, but then care for quality. Statute means written law. Law that has been through a process of enactment. So it's a law that prevents the commission of frauds in any case. More precisely, when you buy a house, a contract for the sale of land must be in writing to avoid the commission of frauds. Therefore, it should be la ley que prevé la comisión de fraudes, in any case, o que establece los requisitos que se deben cumplir para evitar la comisión de fraudes. This should be a more meaningful translation, and you can work it out on your own. Don't rely on dictionaries so much, especially if you are undergraduate students. Don't depend on Guillermo Cabanelas, Patricia Mazuco. They are reliable professionals, but there's a lot that you can do with your own careful and deep comprehension. Comprehension is the basis of translation. At the end of the day, even if this is field specific, the rules of translation theory still apply. Shall we move on to further examples? If there is anybody who would like to participate and suggest a correction, please let me know. You're welcome. Execution of a contract, ejecución del contrato. What's the problem here? By ejecución del contrato, what we mean is full performance of a contract. However, in some other contexts, execution can be translated as ejecución. La ejecución de un exhorto. So then don't narrow down your perspective. And if you still like to, if you still insist on relying on glossaries, try to make sure that your glossaries are comprehensive enough to include all these senses. Words may have more than one meaning. Execution of a contract means signing the contract. So the consequences of not getting a false cognate is a change of meaning. And the ultimate consequence, if you are a student, is getting a flunk or getting close to that. Jurisprudence, jurisprudencia, okay, I've already anticipated this. Jurisprudence basically means philosophy of law, and jurisprudencia es una fuente del derecho. However, polysemy, remember what I mentioned some minutes before. So if you don't even need to look it up in the Blackstone dictionary, but if you happen to look up this word up in the Merriam-Webster's dictionary, you will see that jurisprudence means philosophy of law, but sometimes it may also mean jurisprudencia as a source of law. So read and think. That's my only option. This presentation was rather short, and then of course I've decided not to include written examples, but then check it out on your own. Go back to the texts that you're dealing with, your translation assignments, and I'm sure that you're going to confirm these two meanings. Statute doesn't mean estatuto, And what is estatuto? The bylaws, yes. This is the, estatuto is actually a contract. It's a contract that is used or that is entered into for the purposes of incorporating a business. And statute is written law as enacted by Parliament. Therefore, the meaning is absolutely different. So be careful with that. Corporación, corporation. Well, todo el mundo lo usa así, ya está, déjalo así. Okay, but that's not the point. This is the answer that I get more than once from my clients, but still a corporation is a legal entity for business, for profit. A corporation is an artificial person, whereas corporación refers to an association of people with shared interests. Example, Corporación de Abogados Católicos. Demand, demanda. That's a beautiful one, isn't it? Why don't they mean the same? Come on. A demand letter. What do you understand by that? Let me put it more clearly. Are there graduate translators here? Are all of you students? Students on the one hand, and then professors on the other hand? Suppose students. Suppose that in the future, while you are working as a translator, a client delays in his or her payments. And the sum of money is really important. So then what do? You give up? Send them a demand letter. Have I made it clearer for you? Es una carta de intimación de pago. No es una demanda. Well, but maybe you will do that later, you see. Then moving on, as I'm running short of time, legal and equitable remedies. How many times have we spoken about common law and equity? You see, no son los remedios equitativos y legales. Even if you see that in many translated versions, these are remedies deriving from common law and equity. The story is longer than this presentation, but in any case, you have to look for a functional equivalent, and that functional equivalent derives from comparative law. Legal translation is, at the end of the day, the result of comparative linguistics. Indemnity, indemnización. Sometimes an indemnity may include indemnización. Look at that. I look at her. Yo te cubro. You see, I will protect you. That's an indemnity. Protect her against claims filed by third parties, damages. So in case she has to pay a compensation as part of that claim, okay, I will pay that compensation. So that's the reason why indemnidad may include indemnización, but in fact, it's a commitment to protect. I am delivering this presentation in my capacity as certified legal translator, en mi carácter de. But then, in some other contexts, capacity may be capacidad. That has an important meaning, especially in civil law. Magistrate will not mean magistrado. You see, magistrado is a higher ranking judge. Magistrate, even in England, especially in England, can even be a juez de paz. So the hierarchy is absolutely low. And you know, by the way, la fe pública, the power of attestation, is not public faith. We legal translators have an extra commitment. And we have to bear the consequences in case should our translations fail to be faithful. So that's the reason why we have to be especially careful and cautious. Representations are declaraciones, manifestaciones. Parte, I have already spoken about that. Finally, security. Seguridad. Okay, yes. Right? in many other contexts. But then if you take into account, if you're analyzing a security agreement, well, in that case, security is an equivalent of garantía real. Well, what's that? It takes longer to explain this, but it is basically a pledge, a mortgage, prenda, hipoteca, you say, I am securing the performance of an obligation through my house, through my vehicle. That's security. Una garantía que recae sobre un objeto. So by all means, the meaning is absolutely different. Finally, then, don't narrow down your perspective. I insist on this. So, some of my colleagues prohibit glossaries. Yo a mis alumnos no les dejo glosarios, no. I have given up. I know they will still use glossaries, but then try to reduce your strict reliance on glossaries. Make them comprehensive enough, or in any case, apply all the lessons that Maria Herminia has just delivered. Meaning, understand, apprehend, comprehend. In consideration of the above, the parties agree as follows. Okay, after having listened to this presentation, I have learned that consideration es contraprestación. Entonces, en contraprestación de lo antedicho, las partes acuerdan lo siguiente. You're shaking your head. You're smiling at me. Why? Haven't I said that consideration was contraprestación? However, in this case, it can be translated absolutely literally. En consideración o en virtud de lo antedicho. We translate ideas. We don't translate words. I have already learned that doctrina, como fuente del derecho, is not doctrine. Okay, because my professor has explained and has taught me that it's opinions of legal experts, opinions of scholars, or textbooks and authorities. Okay, so that la doctrina del estoppel, so then how can you fit it in? Doctrine of estoppel? Well, come on, I thought that doctrine could never be used. Yes, but when you're referring to a deeply ingrained principle in law, such as the doctrine of the binding precedent, the doctrine of estoppel, which by the way is the equivalent of doctrina de los actos propios, if it's a deeply ingrained principle, then it's a true cognate. Last but not least, the word lien. This is an example of polysemy rather than false friends. Yo sé que es gravamen. You see, I have, you see, así lo tengo en el glosario once again. Or I look it up in the dictionary, the first sense that I see, gravamen. But not really. Lien is a wide-ranging, or the meaning of lien is wide-ranging, depending on whether it is consensual, whether it is the result of an agreement, whether it is imposed by an authority, a tax authority. If it is imposed by a tax authority, then it is, of course, gravamen. But if it is consensual, the result of an agreement, then it will be closer to what we understand as derecho de garantía real or derecho de retención. But then in order to understand what we mean by derecho de retención, derecho de garantía real, you must study law. So then take all your law subjects seriously. That's my final recommendation, so that you don't commit mistakes, you don't incur in changes of meaning that will flunk your exams, and that will take you to a risky situation in the future when assuming or when undertaking the so-called power of attestation. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, that's my mail.
Thank you very much. Now we are ready for your question and answer session. Please hand over your questions to our lecturers, to one of the room assistants.
We have a question for Cecilia. So the question says, in view of all the problems and issues you have presented, how useful is AI in legal English translation? What should then the role of an editor, a translator, or a person be?
An I, you said?
AI, artificial intelligence.
Oh, okay. So then there are two questions. Artificial intelligence. Well, you can't deny reality. Artificial intelligence is already an undeniable process. We translators, we usually have an excuse. I need more context. So it depends on context. It depends on the type of text. If the syntax is sort of simple, predictable, artificial intelligence can help you meet tight deadlines. That's the truth. Clients many times don't wait. Judges don't wait when we work as expert witnesses. But then don't rely exclusively on that. The post-editing is vital. Should you apply artificial intelligence? And then that takes me to the second question, which is the role of an editor. Yes, absolutely essential. The thing is that suppose that you are a certified legal translator and you rely on an editor for the final proofreading and editing of your translation. That means paying extra fees. If your client is ready to accept more expensive fees, even if they're reasonable enough, that should be okay. If not, you as translator will have to play both roles. Have I answered the question?
And then we have another question for Maria. In your experience, is it significantly harder for a professional interpreter to apply the hermeneutical approach when compared to a translator, right? And then, well, the question also says, congrats to both lectures, very enlightening contribution.
Well, thank you for the congrats. And well, you know that interpreting and translating work on different fields. Even though techniques may always be applied, especially in the field of hermeneutical techniques. The fact is that when you have more time, of course, you go deep into that message. That's one activity. When you don't have time, and it depends on, and I will make a digression here. The medium is different, right? Spoken or written. Now, the translator may have translating abilities and lack interpreting abilities. Here I'm using the word interpreting with the technical meaning as a term of art within the theory of interpretation, languages, not philosophically, right? Now, if the translator and the interpreter are the same person and having the same abilities, the hermeneutical method applies always, because the hermeneutical method is a method, but before becoming a method is a way of thinking, a way of understanding the world. So your brain and your spirit and your emotions, and I'm not going to define each term from the medical standpoint or neuroscientific standpoint as well. So I think that it may be possible. Yes. Now you are making use of an effective tool in a different environment or medium, right? A water medium or a gaseous medium, right? It's water always. Now, the key thing here is the abilities, the inherent abilities of the translator. Sometimes they converge into the same person. Many other times they don't. But that's another story, no? That's to deal with the brain, right?
And then we have another question for Cecilia. What is your advice for scientific translation students and who are going to study certified translation?
I mean, those who were choosing these two courses of study? Okay. Well, legal translation is in fact technical translation. It's field specific translation at the end of the day. My advice? Well, I've got plenty of advice, perhaps. Focus your objectives in any case, and perhaps you get an excellent opportunity to combine both. What do I mean by that? Patents, trademarks. This is an area of law that combines both technical domain and legal domain. That would be an excellent opportunity of combining both inputs. But then technical or scientific translation, that's extremely wide-ranging in my opinion. Engineering, but then how many fields of engineering? Civil engineering, systems engineering, medicine, architecture, the wine industry. What exactly do you mean by technical and scientific translation? Believe me, the spectrum is really wide and comprehensive. So focus your objectives and if possible, combine the two backgrounds. That's my recommendation.
Thank you very much.
I think this is over. So we'll now hold our next session on translation and interpreting. So I leave the floor to my colleague Norma Andrada, who will chair this part of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hola. Gracias. ¿Comenzamos? No.
Okay, so we would now like to invite you to please take your seat and remain silent so that we can start this third part.
Shall we start? Okay, the next speakers are joining us from the United States. So let's welcome our first lecturer, Adriana Maldonado, whose virtual dissertation on editorial translation is entitled A Union of Languages. Adriana, you have the floor. No se escucha. Open the microphone, please, Adriana. You're muted. Okay. I think you are still muted. You have just unmuted, but it's muted once again, I think.
Here we go.
Yeah. Great. It's fantastic.
Okay. Good morning, good day. I would like to start a little bit different. I would like everybody to please close your eyes for a few seconds. As you relax and you breathe, try to hear that small voice that you have that speaks to you every morning when you open your eyes each morning. Ask yourselves, what language is that voice speaking to you right now? Is it your native language or is it your second or your third language? Interesting to pause for a second and see what the brain has chosen. We are together here today to share a special passion, a connection of understanding and speaking more than one language. I am so honored to and thrilled to be part of this amazing group. Today, we are united virtually in a place where we share a unique and fundamental way of communicating, and it's through speaking more than one language. Whether we speak Spanish or we speak English, Portuguese, French, Italian, it is such a unique world of sharing ideas, thoughts, and preferred language. And it is amazing how the brain can choose how we choose to communicate with each other. So let me give you a little bit of my own experience in the language and the world of translations. I was born in Riobamba, Ecuador, a small city located in a valley surrounded by the Andes Mountains, home to the Chimborazo volcano, one of the largest and the native biggest volcanoes in the world. You would think that my first language would be Spanish, right? Yet I have a very unique story. When I was 5 years old, my parents migrated to the United States, to New York, where the mountains I saw were now transformed into very large skyscrapers, the home of buildings, the World Trade Center. I so vividly recall my first day of kindergarten, and the people spoke to me in a language that I did not understand. My first words were, "Thank you," and "I need the bathroom, please." Kind of a funny story, right? And yet somehow in a week, I already had a list of words that I could understand in a different language. It was kind of unique to see all these words where I could understand. As time passed, I would take my English homework and use a dictionary and an encyclopedia because we didn't have Google at the time, right? And I would translate from English to Spanish so that my mother could help me do the homework. And then I would translate the Spanish back to English again so I could do the homework for the school. This kind of took me to my first journey of becoming bilingual. You would think I would choose translations to translate as a profession, right? And take advantage of my Spanish courses that I took in high school and in college. I became an architect instead. I thought instead of, I took a different career path, having two languages, but it catapulted me to my second profession, which is bilingual profession for editorial translations for print and digital. Editorial translations is a world of a union of languages, To create such a unique platform of communications, to be able to guide, teach, inspire a child, a student, a professional, a parent, or an intellectual curious person through the translations of languages, it's a privilege for all of us who are united in this virtual chat. We are currently living in a world where technology takes presence in our daily lives. However, the world of editorial takes a special spot. We can take any medium of work, whether it is a report, a book, a writing lesson, a lecture, a video, or even map directions, and have the uniqueness of translated into various languages such as English to Spanish to Portuguese to Italian to German to Russian, and do the opposite again. We can take the content and present it in a print format or in a digital format. And the best part of all types of the languages, we have the advantage of using the technology and, of course, the transition of most effective way, print. I have worked with McGraw-Hill Education for the past 10 years as a senior digital content and project manager for the school division. In this unique position, I have been given the rare opportunity to transform all types of editorial content from a print presentation to a digital presentation, from English to Spanish and from Spanish to English. Uniting the talent, the professionalism, and experience from pedagogists, linguistics, translators, as such as you, proofreaders, editors, digital engineers, and many teams that we have reading and writing print content in various formats, in books and lessons and audio and games, and transform them into digital platforms for the use of the teachers and the children. Even more critical during COVID-19, the pandemic across all the countries, our work became very important, urgent, and precise. In this unique task of transferring content from print to digital, we also had the unique step of translating the content from English to Spanish and Spanish to English in both formats, print and digital. Working with the teams that are bilingual and understand the content in both languages and formats have been very accomplishing and a very amazing program that we have worked in. Helping the editors to teach our children from kindergarten through 6th grades. We have provided content, everything from lessons to ebooks, audio games, interactive ancillaries. And of course, the nucleus of this whole thing has been the bilingual part, the translators. And you as students, as young people, are very unique and need to continue studying and become a professional so that we can continue working on this fabulous road and adventure of translating everything that we can. It is critical that each would be proud and passionate of this unique sphere that we have, this talent. We have an advantage of sharing and communicating more than one language. How fabulous is it to know that we can communicate in English? We can talk in Spanish, in German, perhaps in dialects such as Jamaican Patois or Quechua or Guarani. Each one of you have the talent in your hands to be unique and to format that uniqueness of changing, of translating, of giving somebody else a perspective of uniqueness in different languages, telling a story in different languages. At the beginning of my story, I started asking everybody to please close your eyes for a few seconds. As you relax and you breathe, the little voice speaks to you as soon as you open your eyes every morning. I want to do one more thing. When you go to sleep tonight and you wake up in the morning again, find out what language you breathe, you dream in. It has been scientifically proven that the language that you dream of is your first language. Your brain acknowledges. The rest of the languages are second, third, and so on. The brain is so unique that it could actually create folders of the different languages that you can speak to, and you could go back and forth. Imagine this, you're such a young people, professionals. We're sitting in front of amazing people, professionals who have 10, 20, 30 years of experience who could hop between languages. And we are here to tell you, each one of you, that you are just as amazing as everybody who's sitting and talking to you, that you need to continue with the education. You have to have, be happy in this new adventure, to continue and develop your communication with different people, with different backgrounds, whether they're young, whether they're old, whether professionals, whatever the world takes you to, the adventures in your life. Always remember that languages is the union of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana.
Any questions? Oh, and also, I could also speak in Spanish. No hay ningún problema. Yo hablo en español, hablo en inglés, lo que ustedes quieran.
Thank you, Adriana. We'll hold questions at the end. The second speaker is deals with the field of interpretation. So please welcome Helen Eby, whose virtual presentation is entitled Community Interpreting in America in the Age of Zoom. Helen, take the floor. You are muted. You are muted, Helen.
I noticed I have a little sign show up on Zoom that says you are muted. Please turn on your mic. Basically, you dunderhead, hit Alt-A and turn on your mic. So sorry for that. And I just wanted to start saying hi. And I grew up in Pennsylvania. I was born in Pennsylvania in the United States, but my mom is Argentine. And so when I was 8 years old, we went to Argentina and I stayed there until I was 28. I grew up in Vicente Lopez and Becar. So if anybody is from there, you probably know a little bit of my background. And I went to my grandmother's school, the Colegio Hudson in Vicente Lopez, where we had English in the morning and Spanish in the afternoon. And after that, I went to med school for a couple of years at the UVA. And then I studied at YASE. And I also graduated as a teacher from Lenguitas back when all they had after high school was teaching English and Spanish for teachers. So that's more or less my background for you from there. And I still visit once in a while when I can get to Argentina. With COVID, it's been difficult, to say the least. So anyway, enough about that. But I'm here to talk about community interpreting. So we've got a switch. We're moving from translation to interpreting, and from, the fancy, well-known things to basically the more common things when we are supporting the community with our work. So I do a lot of what I'd call community translation and community interpreting. I work for public relations departments and community engagement types of settings. And let me set my watch so I have some idea of how much of your time I'm taking. I'm already behind. So community interpreting is interpreting for services that are provided to the community. I want to show you a slide real quick. Can I share screen? Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I'm going to share my screen now. First, let me see how that works, if it actually works or not. And I'm going to show their screen. Please let me know if you can see the screen, Norma.
Yes, we can.
Great. So here is something interesting. Law boosts interpreting assistance in school. That was from July 4 of 2022. We always think that language access is part of the Civil Rights of 1966, Civil Rights Act, Title VI. But in reality, it took another 10 years for the schools in California to file a lawsuit because their Chinese students were now getting F's instead of A's in school because they had switched them from Chinese to English. Now, Adriana would understand that well, because if they had been teaching her in her native language, which she hasn't told us what is, I'm assuming it might be Quechua.
Nope, Spanish. I did learn a little bit from my grandmother. In my mother's side, she spoke to me in Quechua, but again, in the Spanish, in the Ecuadorian language, we have
Okay.
the dialect of Quechua with some words, yes.
Okay, so because I didn't hear that Spanish was your native language in the first thing. So anyway, think of it this way. It took from 1976 when the Lau v. Nichols was filed until 2022 for schools in Washington state to have a law that requires that interpreters have qualifications. Right now, I mean, until this law passed, the janitor could interpret in a school. All right. Anybody they could find, a Spanish teacher even, which you'd think that a Spanish teacher knows both languages. Well, I've had to interpret for people who teach AP Spanish in the United States. So I don't trust Spanish teachers in the US for good reason. I mean, if I have to interpret for him, then I don't trust him to be able to provide interpreting for others. So this is important. Interpreting in the States in community settings like schools, healthcare, legal, and public engagement with government bodies is getting a boost. It's now becoming more important. But the thing is, you've got to be able to speak to the people you're addressing. You know, these would be Hispanics who send their kids to school in the Seattle area. And they are mostly from Mexico. Many of them have influence of Nahuatl in their speech. So, for example, they might say, me duele la mano, and what really hurts is this thing up here. Because mano in Nahuatl, the word, they have one word for the whole upper extremity. Does that make sense? So when they say me duele la cintura, they are talking about this back here. That would be the lower back in English. So you have to clarify what part of the body they're working with. So that's a challenge in the world of Zoom. Because in Zoom, when they just say something, you don't necessarily see them say, me duele la mano. You don't always see that. You might just see their face. They might be sitting here robotically like most people do, which is one of the reasons Zoom is so tiring. And you wouldn't see any movement to tell you exactly what they mean. Telling them to please stand up and show you what hurts when they say cintura is not always possible. So there are some, when something doesn't make sense, please always ask for clarification. That shows you're a professional who cares about what you're saying. All right. So I just wanted to show that off because I think it's awesome that in Seattle we have a new law. And now I live in Washington State, so that's where I am. So the next slide I want to show you is how people can are required to show their skills in the US. In the US, we have certification. So this is not necessarily available in all countries, but in the US, we have this thing called interpreting certification that shows what your skills are. Now, to pass the court certification, you have to be able to pass all three skills of interpreting: simultaneous interpreting, consecutive, and sight translation, with a score of at least 70%. Now, 30% mistakes can be pretty bad because if you think you're missing, but they're checking for important mistakes. So the important mistakes probably count more. So, but in healthcare, in the exam that checks all three skills, look at the percentages. 75%, actually, not 70%, I got that wrong, of the score is from your consecutive interpreting. 75%. And they give you a cumulative score on the whole shebang, the whole thing you did. And then simultaneous is 15% and sight translation is 10%. So I want a show of hands of who, if you needed to do something that involved simultaneous interpreting, who would you call? Who would prefer to call a healthcare interpreter? I want a show of hands, Norma, and tell me what the hands say. How many would call a healthcare interpreter if they needed interpreting in a simultaneous setting?
Not many, really.
Okay.
No one.
How many would call a certified court interpreter?
A court interpreter?
Yeah,
No one.
if they needed simultaneous interpreting.
No.
Well, the thing is, the court interpreter is the one you should call because they are required to pass every skill. Now that you understand that, how many hands go up?
Mhm. So actually court interpreters, I understand, for us will be legal interpreters or translators.
Well, I mean court interpreters in the United States where you're tested
Yeah,
on
that's right.
oral skills. Court
That's right.
interpreters in Argentina are a different breed. It would be nice if you were tested on your interpreting skills, not just on your translation skills. It'd be nice if you were tested on that, but it's a different process to be certified as a
That's right. Yeah.
legal translator in Argentina. In the United States, translation results in a written product and interpreting results in an oral product. They are different things. So when I hear somebody say, so, did you understand? Yeah. Well, that's kind of a no, really. It means not really. Because if you have to think that hard about whether you understood, it's more of a not really. So I wanted to show you that real quick. And certification is a test that is provided by a third party that is neutral. It's not by your employer. And in many states, it's mandatory for interpreting the courts. And it eliminates even healthcare interpreting certification, eliminates one of the serious problems, which is maybe, let's say you got injured at, while you were doing some logging, working in the working in the forest, and a tree branch fell on your arm. And guess what? Your arm's going to hurt for some reason or other. So your boss takes you in and he speaks both languages. So he says, I'll interpret for you. And then when they ask, so where did this happen? Well, it happened at work. And the boss interprets, it happened at home. Because he doesn't want this to be a workers' comp claim. He doesn't want to say that you were injured on the job and hurt their insurance prospects. So who would you really want to have interpreting for you? Your boss or a neutral, impartial healthcare interpreter? Really, you're neutral. And there's a conflict of interest for your boss. It's a conflict of interest 101. So that's a problem when your boss does that. So that has been the setting where interpreting has happened in the US. Now, we came into the pandemic and we got Zoom. And at first, I really hated Zoom because there was Zoom bombing. Does anybody remember Zoom bombing? Did anybody get Zoom bombed in the room? I want to show hands. I want you to tell me.
No, not really.
Yeah, well, Zoom bombing was when you were giving a presentation, all of a sudden somebody would start to scratch your screen and would put a picture of their friend or something like that on the screen. So many of us took a while to say, okay, Zoom is all right. They had to put all their security things in place and then we could do it. And I remember interpreting for the mayor of Hillsborough when he was speaking to the community. So this is, again, community interpreting. I was interpreting consecutively because Zoom did not have a simultaneous feature at the time. And this went on to Facebook Live. It might be available somewhere, but who knows? So when I was on camera, I could say, hey, Mayor, you've gone too long. And I could stop him. But now with simultaneous interpreting, I can't really raise my hand because my camera is off. Just try to imagine me raising my hand when I look like this. Can I really do it? Not really. But the reason we turn our cameras off and simultaneous is so it's not distracting to everybody to see two people speaking at the same time. That just drives everybody crazy. So it's really challenging and you have to use you just have to keep up. But I've heard a lot of people talk about translating words properly. And interpreting, we focus on the meaning of the message. What is the intent of the speaker? What is the meaning of the message? We need to get the message across quickly in our first attempt and get it right most of the time, or get at least the most important parts right. If he repeated himself, we can let that go. I've got a colleague who wrote something, and we published that in the Interpreters Division blog a couple days ago. So let me read this to you. My guess is that a year from now, a record number of staff interpreters who rarely considered leaving their place of employment prior to the pandemic will be strongly considerate or will have already made a change. According to CCHI's 2016 job task analysis 5 years ago, 80% of the respondents said that in-person was their primary healthcare interpreting modality. So most of them were in person. If the medical center where I work is any indication, this ratio is now closer to 60%. So we've gone from 12% people interpreting remotely to 40% in a short time. Since the in-house productivity data at my institution shows remote interpreters are 300% more productive than their in-person counterparts, I can't imagine the administration ever making the switch back. So, remote interpreting appears to be here to stay. We are seeing a change from like 90% remote and 10% in person to having more in-person appointments than we had, a year ago, when it was actually very dangerous to go into a medical setting because you are likely to get a disease that will not be named right now. It's just, you couldn't do that. You were putting your health at risk. But right now it's moving back to remote. I mean, it's moving back to in person with a bunch of remote in place. However, to interpret remotely, you need some, there's some different things that you have to take care of. When you're interpreting on site, you can see the people you're interpreting for. You can actually raise your hand and they'll see it. They can't avoid it. You have undistorted sound. You get exactly the sound in the room. Yesterday, I was meeting with a bunch of interpreters. No, it was the day before yesterday. And they said that they were not getting clear sound. That is because not everybody was using the microphone. I'm using a headset with a boom microphone, and I'm hoping you're hearing me clearly. Norma, how is my sound?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
Well, that's because I'm using a Bose headset with an expensive microphone. This is not free.
Yeah.
But as an interpreter, I can't afford to have you not hear me well. Now, speakers don't think about that, and they just use their computer microphone, and then they sit way back here, and I can't hear anything they say, so I hear mumbles, and I have to interpret that. For in-person, you have to deal with transportation. Now, for you guys, coming to the United States to interpret would be so expensive, nobody would call you. But for remote interpreting, you need infrastructure. You need to have a high-speed internet connection, because without that, your connection falls down, and you're not the one who can. You can't do anything about it. And when you're down, the meeting is over. So can the clients really afford to have somebody with a flaky internet connection? Not really. In person, in a healthcare setting or in a school setting, you can say, whoa, the interpreter can only interpret for one person at a time, and everybody stops because everybody hears you. In remote, you're interpreting into the interpreting channel, and the main room does not hear you. Only the people who are hooked into Spanish or whatever language you're speaking can hear you. So you have to go to the English channel to say, whoa, whoa, whoa. The interpreter can only interpret for one person at a time. That's when you're using the simultaneous feature, of course. And then the concern that I heard from a government body that hires healthcare interpreters was that on site they can share paper documents, but on remote, share documents? That's more complicated. So they can't do that. So there are advantages to in person still, which is why these people want to focus on in-person interpreting. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and close my PowerPoint for a second because I'm done with that. No need to keep that going. So that's kind of, because of all this and because interpreting is an unregulated profession, one of the things that Norma and I did some time ago was to write a job description for interpreters and another job description for translators. And that has really helped some people understand where they're going and how to set themselves up. And I'm hoping that she's going to share those with you if she hasn't done so already, because we wrote these for HR professionals and also for people who are considering this as a profession. And they were published on the Interpreting Division website. I'm the administrator. And but they were published there because they're good documents, not because I'm the admin. And Norma collaborated on those. So I'm hoping that that is available to you. The other thing I didn't mention is pay. Yeah, we all like to get paid, right? Is there anybody here who works for free?
Not really.
Yeah. And so, we do like to get paid, but you know, if you don't, you need to do the math on how much you need to get paid. And if you can't afford to work at the rate they're paying you, just find something else to do. You can't afford to be in a position where you're putting your groceries on your credit card every month because you never get paid enough. I get as a leader in this field, I get a lot of phone calls saying, "Hey, Helen, this is not sustainable. How do I make ends meet?" And I ask them, "So what did you study?" "Well, I studied physical therapy." You know, physical therapy pays better. Go do that. So be careful and make sure that you ask for decent pay. I think in the future, the people who are going to lead us are not going to be people like me who didn't have an opportunity to study this. In Argentina, I didn't go for intérprete traductor público because I was not an Argentine citizen, and that was required at the time. So that's why you're not seeing me sitting in the Colegio de Traductores Públicos. I like conference interpreting a whole lot better than I like court, but you know, but it's been great to be able to interpret for government bodies that are looking for communicating with their audience here in the United States as they write regulations. One of the groups that Milena Calderon-Waldron and I interpreted for was people who are writing regulations on for people who do house cleaning. And so because we're interpreting, they could come and speak to the government in Spanish, and we could provide interpreting for them. And because it was on Zoom, they only had to take 10 or 15 minutes out of their day job to come and do this instead of having to sacrifice the whole morning or the whole day to do it. People, this has made it possible. Zoom has made it possible for people to participate in this kind of thing and influence government rules without having to take ridiculous amounts of time to do it. I mean, doctor consultations are going online because that way people don't have to take the time to drive there and back and wait 15 minutes in the office. And so it's a 15 minutes out of their day instead of 2 hours out of their day. School parent-teacher conferences are having the option of in-person and remote for exactly the same reason. And they're getting more parents to show up in school, even by Zoom, and talk to the teachers about their children. So those are very strong benefits of the new hybrid situation that are going to be there for a long time. They won't be able to take remote away from people who just say, "I can't leave my job to go there. It takes me 4 hours and I'd rather just be with you for 15 minutes on Zoom." Norma, I think we should let people ask questions, or have you
Yes.
give us give me some cues about what else you'd like me to talk about. So it's over to you.
Okay.
You know me well enough to drive me crazy.
Thank you very much, Helen, for your presentation. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, we open now the floor to questions. Are there any questions to Adriana on editorial translation, on to Helen, or on interpreting? I have one question for Adriana first. Adriana, in your role as project manager for print and digital material at McGraw-Hill Education, that is a leading publishing house in the United States, what other skills do you think are necessary for translators to acquire after graduation?
As this is a very personal opinion of mine from what I have seen working with so many people, with so many editors at different parts of their lives, right? But my biggest recommendation to all of you is to continue with your education, to always every day learn something new, always be on top of what's going on, always have that passion to understand the translations and understand how important your view of translation is to your job. So everything you touch, everything you translate, everything you want to communicate via a language, you should every day learn something new. Always keep up with the news, keep up with everything that's going on, learn something new. And I know I'm telling you a lot, that you don't have time. You can tell me I don't have time. Well, you know what? If you have 5 minutes to be in Facebook and TikTok, you have 5 minutes to read something and understand about your language. It is very important that your education, especially the young crowds, you're so into the digital world, and and I have two daughters. I always see them in TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, everything, Google. You know what? If you have the time to do that, you also have time to make sure that your education is always on top of the line so that you can interpret whatever you are translating with a passion.
Adriana,
Yes.
I'd like to invite you to join the Spanish Editors Association. Another plug, I'm the president, Spanish Editors.
I would love it. Yes, of course.
We need you there.
I would love it. I am passionate with languages. My two daughters are professional translators. They speak English and Spanish. They have been accredited here in the United States. So why? Because I'm a passion of languages. I think speaking whatever languages you speak, like I said before, it's very important that to the young crowd, communication, talking, not TikTok. It's important, but it's important also that you have that passion and you always read and always make sure that you're studying and always ahead, so that you will be someone for somebody else important.
I've noticed something here in the United States, and I know I've been asked to talk about interpreting, but I get to steal the microphone and say whatever I want sometimes. But in the US, what I've noticed is a lot of organizations, like Washington County and Oregon or whoever, are hiring bilingual employees. They're asking them to write stuff. And then they really need not a translator as much, but they need somebody to edit that to something that's actually readable by the public, that doesn't
Yes.
have mistakes.
Yes.
So you need to know your US audience, and you also need to have strong editing skills.
Yes, I want to touch something that you said, depending on in the United States, depending where you are, whether you're in the South, whether you're in the North and the West, the interpretation of a word in Spanish and whatever language depends on the person who's translating. That's one of the uniqueness, for example, that I learned about Spanish, for example. In Ecuador, a jacket is una chopa. In Argentina, the jacket is una
campera. Campera.
Yes.
Campera.
Campera. And it's so, like everybody has such a different interpretation of the word. A zip straw in Ecuador is un sorbete. Peanuts. In Mexico is again, my Spanish is going right now. Exactly. So
Cacahuates, yeah.
how the translator and the editor, the proofreader gets together is extremely important for your audience.
And then
Very
there's, palettes of stuff. Because people have learned these terms in the United States because they didn't deal with palettes, they often call them paletas. Health insurance, people here call it aseguranza, whether you like it or not. Seguro médico is fine, but when the doctor has a sign at their office saying se requiere aseguranza, and I see that in every doctor's office I go to, I can't say, I mean, at Lingüitas, one thing they taught us is, hey, girls, we're training you here to go. It's the only teacher certification that is valid nationwide in Argentina. So when you go to Salta, don't tell them they're all wrong. If everybody in Salta says something a certain way, accept it and roll with it. Teach them the other stuff that actually matters.
Yes.
So I don't fight aseguranza when somebody sends it to me, because that's what everybody's using.
But you know what? If we do not fight, then we start losing the language.
True. But if it's for an Oregon doctor's office and it's only going to be in their office, I'm gonna say, well, seguro médico is better, but if you are stuck on aseguranza, I'm not going to lose you as a client.
Yeah,
that depends on the audience, I think.
Exactly.
And for translators too. It's important for translators to know where the document they are translating is going to, whether it's going translating into English for the United States or they are translating into English for the UK. I mean, they need to know actually where that document is going to be used if they are translated into English, or where that document comes from, because the use of English and the use of the terminology in different countries may mean different things.
Correct. So using a neutral term,
Spanish.
Yeah. So using a neutral term that everybody understands, like seguro médico, is really best. However, if I'm interpreting for somebody and they say aseguranza, when I interpret back seguro médico, they may not understand what I'm saying, or they may think I'm just talking down to them. I remember one patient who started, so what do you call this? Is this cogote? I'm like, well, my grandmother said cogote, so why can't you? And, I would have said cuello if I had been asked what's the word for this. But if she says cogote, I'm not going to argue with her, because the last thing I want to do is antagonize the Spanish speaker I'm interpreting for at a doctor's office. I'm not there to teach him language.
I am going to jump on that. For example, with what I work with, we are touching the education of children, right, and teachers, and that audience is such important, because that is the foundation for what the children are going to learn in the language. For example, in this example I'm going to give is in Spanish, from English to Spanish, and from Spanish to English. I am very adamant with my teams, and I have a large amount of teams, and Norma knows this. The proofreading that I specifically do with my teams, I am very strict about using the correct translation.
Absolutely.
Specifically for the teachers and for the students, because I'm going to use your word, cago, the throat. We have to teach the children. If we do not start in the bottom of teaching the children the correct way of speaking Spanish, English, Portuguese, whatever language you want to do. And in my case, because we're doing the reading and the grammar from kindergarten to 5th grade, which is the most important ages for children to learn, it is my responsibility and my team's responsibility to make sure that the translations are to perfection. And we do not tolerate, and if something goes wrong, we go back and we change immediately, because we need to make sure the children, we guide the children across the different worlds of languages.
I absolutely agree with you, Adriana. But you see, we're talking about two different settings. You're talking about books that are published. And I remember doing the editing of a translation of a science book for middle school, where every blasted time it said milliliter, the person had translated milímetro from a unit of volume to a unit of length. I mean, it was in the whole book. This translator had no concept of science.
I would have gotten rid of her.
Well, they should have, but they
I
told me
would have
she's
gotten
a
rid of her. Yeah.
But I mean, after the first 2 chapters, I'm like, get rid of her. Let me translate this thing. They kept
Yeah.
having me edit her junk. I found that completely unacceptable. And
Yeah.
of course, it went downhill from there, Adriana. It got worse. There were things where I had to just retranslate the paragraph and then I asked the guy who was on the next line, the next guy, to please edit my work, because as a translator, you need the second pair of eyes looking at stuff. But yes, absolutely. But when I'm in an interpreting session and I'm dealing with a human being who is using particular language, if I use their words, I'm going to communicate better. They're not going to have to process, wait, when she said this, did she mean what I said or did she mean something else? Those people are in a stressful situation. You never have an interpreter for something this pleasant like a Christmas party. You always have, a friend is having interpreters for her wedding. That's like the crazy rare exception. But generally, you have an interpreter when you're dealing with something that's a problem and you are stressed about it. I mean, when they talk to you about cancer, about, gynecology problems, and you have your child interpret, then the person just doesn't talk to the gynecologist about what's really going on. Not if it's your 12-year-old son. That's happened. Okay, true story.
I got crazy with, and some, I don't know if we have a few more minutes, but this is a fascinating conversation. This is one of the problems we're touching, Norma, in the United States, where, how you translate and how you interpret, a language can vary and could just go downhill so quickly. And then to have children, because the adult doesn't understand the language, the translation just goes down the floor to the floor. And sometimes it could be such a critical, like, you're talking about your health, you're talking about a legal situation, something like that. So
childbirth.
It's a huge problem that we have in the United States about languages and about translations and interpretations and stuff. And again, this is where we're heading with the audience that we're talking to, how important it is to be able to understand and interpret the language correctly, and have the patience to talk to your audience. And sometimes, you know what, you're gonna have to take that. I feel personally, I take a step back and I very, very softly try to teach the person how to say the Spanish word correctly. Even if they tell me, they give me like, whatever. But I think it's very important that we start somewhere, and we cannot lose the battle. We have to continue. We have to continue.
Absolutely.
And the young audience that we're talking to right now, you need to continue the battle. I will be continuing the battle until we're never.
Oh, yeah. I'm fighting that battle here. Poor Norma's going to kick us off and turn the mic off on us if we don't listen.
No, just 5 minutes, but this is important for students that are training and as translators, especially literary translators.
Because Ellen and me are working in the real world. I'm sorry, Norma, we're working in the real world. We are seeing two different interpretations of the language. And I think Helen and myself are bringing to your audience the reality of what it is, whether you're in South America, whether you're in Europe, Africa, this is a reality of the problem.
This is the real world, that's right. And students that are training to become literary translators, for example, that is, Adriana, what you have actually in your teams, literary translators. They, in the field of education, really, something very, very important is to deal not only with the precision and correctness of the language, but also with registers, because it is not the same to translate a text for a first grade or second grade child as for a sixth grade.
Yes, but Norma,
the registers are different, and they, as translators, need to adjust and to adapt.
Yeah, I need to talk about that for a second. I need to address that for a minute, because you can't possibly give me something that's written at the PhD level and expect me to put it down at the sixth grade level in Spanish. Doing that is a two-step process. first I take it in English from PhD to 6th grade. So, you know, from hoity-toity to understandable. And you have to approve the English understandable version. Because if I take it straight to Spanish, you have lost control of the changes I'm making. And converting from impossible to plain language has to be done in the same language the document was written, so the author can approve those changes before it is taken into the other language.
I agree.
It's true.
Yeah.
Just
Totally agree. Yeah. And again, as Norma saying, the two audiences that you're dealing with, whether it's a kindergarten or 6th grader, as a translator, proofreader, editor, you know, we need to take that step and make sure that we are touching the audience correctly with the correct, you know, pronunciation and the correct content of how we're going to be translating from English to Spanish. So one of the things that I do is when I go from English to Spanish, I go back from Spanish to English to kind of make sure that on both ways that we're doing the
Reverse
translations,
translation.
we're catching anything that we have missed. You know, and this is why I'm very proud of the work that I have done with the program that I work with for Spanish and English with the Education Department for McGraw-Hill.
I'm thrilled that you're doing that, Norma. I mean, Adriana, that's fantastic.
And I work with Norma and her teams. It's just and to be honest, I have learned a lot more Spanish doing this because English is my first language. Can you believe that? Yes, I do dream in English.
And I journal in Spanish. I can't journal in English. I journal in Spanish.
Well, many of our graduates in translation, Adriana, have worked in your programs, actually.
Yes.
Mathematics, in reading, in
Yes.
social studies and science, you know that.
Yes. And
So actually, this is good for our students here present in the room to know that they are very, very well regarded in the quality of the work they do, thanks to the education they get here at university.
Yes.
And they have full approval from your teams on their quality.
Yes.
So actually,
So
we are proud about that too.
Let me go back to that for
Congratulations.
I want to go back to that for a second, Norma, because I believe that in the future, the people who are who have a master's degree in the work they do, which should be translation interpreting, and are also certified, which means they've passed what's equivalent to the board exam for doctors. Those people are the ones who are going to lead our profession. So please, people like me who learned by the School of Hard Knocks, you know, dándonos la cabeza contra la pared, those, I mean, that's how we learned, because there was nothing else. And I have not had the time to go back to get a master's degree because I've got kids and I've got issues that make it impossible. But for you, I mean, if you're getting your master's degree, please follow it up with a certification exam if it's available for you, because it's, you know, not all people who graduate from master's degrees actually know what they're doing. And it's sad, but it's the truth. There are people who have graduated from places that give degrees in interpreting who can't pass the certification exam in healthcare, and that has a very high pass rate. So I've seen that, and that's why here we trust people who are certified, because, you know,
That's good advice.
it's important.
Well, thank you so much. It's been very, very interesting, and this discussion and this dialogue, I wish we could go on, but yeah, time is running up. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Perhaps
much.
we will ask you some other time to join in another meeting and discussion with our students.
I'll be more than happy to.
Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Nice to
Thank
meet
very
you.
much.
Stay in
And
touch.
nice, everybody.
Good to meet you guys.
Adios. Mucha suerte.
Que lo pase bien, Jake.
Thank you. Okay, so we get to the end of our session, and now we will have our lunch break, and we will meet again at 3 p.m. for our afternoon sessions on this international conference on modern languages, to Italian and Portuguese in the afternoon. Thank you.